Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Sherning with American Resiliency here with an overview for Mexico's climate outlook. I've had a call out looking for Mexico info for a while now, and I want to thank George H., who found an interactive I'll be sharing in a moment. However, in terms of usable overview information, no one has yet found me anything better than the resources I'm going to share from the World Bank. Their resources are high quality, downloadable, and I think most people would find them difficult to read and understand. But I'm going to do my best to do as clear and accurate a job as I can to help you understand Mexico's climate future. If you're deeply interested in climate, I want you to direct you to this report. I'll have a link where you can download this report in the video description. This is a report prepared through the Mexican government for the UN. It is in Spanish and it has a tremendous depth of information regarding what Mexico has already done to reduce emissions. Mexico is serious about climate. They have done substantial work to bring emissions down, and they recently elected a climate scientist as their president, Claudia Sheinbaum. They've put together a pretty intense climate visualization tool. And George H., thanks a bunch again for sending this over my way. So the reality of my situation is that my Spanish is just good enough to understand that temperatura might mean temperature. This is my way of saying, please, I'm doing my best to pronounce things as I go through here. I don't mean any offense. I'm probably going to sound pretty dumb. In this tool here, we can look at historical temperatures divided into a couple of eras, and we can look at models, different models for different time periods at different RCPs. So it's intensely powerful. However, I am finding it very difficult to see how to compare two different temperature layers. So unless you're really good at taking photographs in your brain and overlaying them, this is painfully difficult to use. But probably if I spoke Spanish, I'd be able to figure it out better. I figure I better put this tool up here front and center. Maybe somebody else is going to be able to make this thing dance. It's very powerful. The best climate projections I have for Mexico that I can understand well enough to explain are here at the World Bank Knowledge Portal. And yes, to everyone interested in climate projections around the world, there is climate outlook information on this portal for almost every part of the earth. I hope to do more international work as we move towards 2025. So in the comments, please help me identify what countries are of most interest to our community here. But let's focus on Mexico. As you see, the report we have here is less than 50 pages long. I can tell you the information in here is not as detailed as we see in the NCA 5, which is the primary source I use for my US outlooks. This is also not as detailed as the source material I use for Canada outlooks or for the European overview video. But we're going to do the best we can. I think you'll be glad to see that this outlook does have some hope. To begin, if you, like me, are an ignoramus regarding Mexico, let's have a brief primer. In the US, I think there are many common misconceptions about Mexico, primarily that Mexico is a uniform, harsh desert landscape that somehow also produces a ton of obviously water-intensive food, like avocados and berries, for export. Obviously, anyone who takes a moment to question these assumptions will realize maybe they're missing something, and that's the richness and the immense diversity of Mexico. Mexico is the 13th largest country in the world. It's divided into 31 states and the capital region of Mexico City. Mexico City isn't a state, kind of like how Washington, D.C. isn't a state. Mexico City is one of the great cities of the world. It's very densely populated. It's been a great world city since long before the time of conquest, if we can take a moment to remember Tenochtitlan. Mexico is considered one of the 6 cradles of human civilization. The cultural richness of Mexico is as dense and powerful as Mexico's biodiversity. The climatic diversity, the landscape diversity of Mexico is absolutely off the hook. The projections that we have here of less than 50 pages are not going to tell us everything we need to know about how this incredibly varied and beautiful land will change. But maybe it can help us understand a little. As we get into it, you'll see the modeling in this report is for a bit of higher temps than I usually model. I usually model for 2C. This is more a 2.5C outlook. With us already at 1.5C over pre-industrial baseline, maybe it's not such a bad thing to have a little further look outwards. I've long thought it was interesting, too, that the World Bank plans for higher end scenarios. Anyway, first, let's talk about the heat. We're going to go to table 5. So here we are in table 5. This shows us projected changes to heat in all of Mexico's states. Let me show you a little bit about how this thing works. If we go down to the second page, it's really more evident. We can see all of the states of Mexico including the state of Mexico in the country of Mexico, and these columns for the number of days where it's going to be too hot, how freaking hot it's going to get, and how many nights are going to be like too hot for people's bodies to recover from daytime heat. If the state has red in a column, that means the change is like really bad, like talking about potentially landscape altering, human life altering change. If it's in white, we're talking about climate change, so it probably doesn't mean good, right? It just means like less awful than the red columns. And if it's in gray, it means we're looking at a lower level of change. It means we're talking about more stability on that particular factor. For example, here, although Mexico City is having other problems, we're not expecting an increase in warm nights in Mexico City. I used that information in figure 5 to make this map. And the way I put the information on the map lets us identify areas with the least dangerous heat increases, with moderate heat increase, some level of danger in the heat increase, and the most dangerous heat increases. So the way this information came together on the map, it stands out that the Yucatan Peninsula and the northern Pacific coast look particularly strong in terms that they don't have very much dangerous heat increase. They're looking at less severe increase in extreme or dangerous heat than other parts of the country. But it's worth noting that doesn't mean that these are cool temperate regions for people who are not familiar with these landscapes. The Baja Peninsula is rich in life and biodiversity, and it's like a hot, arid landscape. So this means that the resilient organisms and people who live there, maybe they have a shot of not surpassing their biological heat limits, but it doesn't mean this is like your ultimate survivability destination. Just so that we're clear on that. We do see that there are heat trends that are quite serious in many parts of the country, including Mexico City. Now let's talk about precipitation trends across Mexico. In the tropical eastern states, this report is projecting a fairly high certainty of annual precipitation decrease. All of the states in that region will experience decreased precipitation in the summer months. All of the states except for Quintana Roo are also projected to experience decreased precipitation in the dry season, winter, and spring months. So we're talking here about changes to the Yucatan Peninsula, where we may see a wet season shift in this part of the country with more than a 10% precipitation increase projected for October under the projected climate conditions. The southern Pacific coast is looking at a large precipitation decline during the summer months. Chiapas is expected to experience the largest decline in this regard of the states in the South Pacific Coast region. Central Mexico is projected to experience less precipitation decline than the other two regions described, which is good, but we should remember central Mexico, by and large, is very arid. Guanajuato, Querétaro, and the state of Mexico show less than a 10% decline in precipitation. Those are the lowest precipitation declines in the central Mexico region. But I want us to remember again, this region is already water stressed, and we saw on that temperature map, it's facing very large heat increases. Regionally, northern Mexico is projected to see the second largest precipitation decline after the southern Pacific. The dry season declines are particularly severe. Where you might have once gotten a little rain to relieve the dry season, that relief is expected to be severely reduced. In the late fall, though, as in other regions, we may see a heavier, delayed wet season with potential precipitation increases projected towards October. So it sounds like overall, with precipitation in Mexico, the wet season may start to come later in some parts of Mexico, particularly towards the east, and that it will be more irregular, with a trend towards some years where the rains don't come in so good. The dry season in most places is projected to become drier. And please remember, I say this trend appears to be strongest towards the east as we're looking towards the Gulf. Northwest Mexico is the exception to this precipitation pattern that I'm describing for the rest of the country. In this arid region, where remember we saw relatively little temperature change, we see a net trend towards precipitation increase, although this will be highly variable. That is good news again for the resilience potential of the Baja Peninsula, which is already a place of extremely hardy life forms adapted to a wide range of extreme conditions. We're going to look at figure 6b from the report now to visualize the range of precipitation change that I'm talking about for these regions. As you might have guessed from my monologue previously, most of our precipitation information in this report is presented in terms of technical writing. But this here in 6B allows us to visualize some of the variability that is described. You can see here that within the scenarios that are being modeled for the report, there's a big range of how much precipitation you may or may not get in their modeling. In the Yucatan, we can see there's a big swing, a big difference between the 10th to 90th percentiles of how much precipitation you're likely to get, and that the overall dip is slightly down. Contrast this to Colima, which is sort of on southern Mexico on the Pacific coast, southern Pacific coast, where we do see probably a net decrease in this spring precipitation, but the variability is not projected to be as intense throughout the year. When we look down here at what we're expecting for Baja, overall, we talked about maybe there is more rain coming for the Baja Peninsula. You can see how much more shaded area is above the line than below the line with what they're talking about. You can also see that you expect a lot of variability for precipitation throughout the year in Baja, which again is normal for this place that is already like extremophiles unite. So variability, probably a net positive for the Baja Peninsula, probably a greater level of deformation in your precipitation cycles as you move towards the Gulf of Mexico, probably a little less deformation as you get towards the Pacific. There is more good news for this area, for the Baja Peninsula, as well as the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, which let me pull this up on the temperature map that I made again. We're talking about this area here, where we're seeing sort of a moderate temperature increases. Both for this area and for the Baja Peninsula, we don't expect as serious a trend towards dangerously intense rains, deluge-type rains, as we see for the rest of the country of Mexico. Across much of the world, we expect a trend towards very heavy storms dumping a lot of water. This trend appears to be more moderated over those two regions of Mexico that may lead to less destructive rain-driven flooding on the Baja Peninsula and across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. I'll leave the map up as I say that overall this is of course a very difficult outlook for Mexico. It's important to note that we see the potential for relative conservation of today's climate in several places, most notably here in Quintana Roo and along the Baja Peninsula. So two very different biodiversity hotspots, some hope there. Here across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, we see more moderate heat increases, less deluge-like rains, and on a climb as we head towards the Pacific, potentially a little less deformation of the water cycle than we see in some parts of Mexico. It's very good to see this potential for some relative stability there, some hope for the people who live here to continue their way of life. However, there's no getting around it. This is a seriously concerning outlook for Mexico City and the many millions of people who live there. From the information that we have from this report, probably from a climate stability perspective, it would be better to head west than to head east if you're going to move within the country. The precipitation trends look a little less variable and the heat trends a little less severe to the west than to the east. You can see that many states on the coast are those facing the mildest temperature increases, but don't forget, if you're by the sea level rise will also be an issue to contend with. In areas at some elevation in the Yucatan Peninsula, particularly in Quintana Roo, which has the least precipitation change trend in the area, you have excellent resilience potential, quite good. And if you're in the northwest along the Pacific coast, of course, your communities are already very resilient and there is potential you will experience some positive change, some occasional precipitation increases in your future that shouldn't be like terrifying deluges too much. This, alongside a lack of dangerously increased heat in the projection, it looks pretty good for the North Pacific coast. Everyone must plan for higher end sea level rise scenarios, but your overall conditions indicate that this Northwest Pacific Coast region has a lot of potential for people and other living things that are suited to the harsh conditions of these lands. Thank you for joining me today. I'm sorry to give such difficult news to such a high percentage of people living in Mexico, but I think it's helpful for us all to flesh out the picture of what changes are likely to come to this rich, diverse, culturally important part of North America. While Mexico is working hard to rise to the challenges of our age and has already made great efforts to reduce emissions, Mexico is not the wealthiest country. Mexico's infrastructure already needed more funding, even before it became apparent that we must respond to climate impacts now. For all of us in North America, it's important to see the potential for continuity in Mexico, that there are areas with relatively strong preservation and that there are many states in Mexico where there is likely to be enough water and cool enough conditions for people to continue to live. The cultures and the peoples of Mexico are strong, and they're strong because they care about community and family and about helping others. In North America, we'll all be stronger if we can help each other. It's in the interests of all of North America that the US and Canada do everything we can to help Mexico save all Mexico can save. Helping Mexico to adapt will help save as many people and other living things as we can save, help more people stay in their homes, and help contribute to the stability of North America as a whole. For those of us who are concerned about border security, it is worth considering Mexico's southern border as a point of common interest. I think many of us may have feared this outlook would be even more dire than it is. Although it is challenging, there are also identifiable bright spots. We can better prepare when we face what we fear. Now we have a clearer picture of what to expect for Mexico and where in Mexico communities might be best suited to build resilience for the long haul. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks for watching. If you're a regular and you've been using the resources I produce, I want you to know I'm experiencing financial stress and I could use your support. If you've got the margin for it, of course, don't put yourself in a situation here. And you should know I never spam people or put you on any lists or anything because I conveniently don't even make any lists of people to potentially spam. Every donation matters. This is a donor-funded organization. I also want to thank everyone in the AR community for your current contributions, which are pretty awesome. We have many dozens of regular donors who are literally keeping the lights on over here. We have teams of volunteers assisting with research and fact checking, data visualization, moderation across platforms, and more. And let's not forget the many people and their communities out there on the ground, building resilience, doing the work, doing what we can to get ready. AR's content has reached more than 200,000 individuals as of mid-July, and we're growing all the time. We've gotten this far because of the support of the community. I won't give up. We're going to keep going together to face what's coming as best we can. Take care and talk with you again soon.